Okay, good morning, everyone. Not morning. Good afternoon, everyone. It is 2:30, so I'm going to get started so that we can make best use of everyone's time. I thank everyone for giving their time this afternoon and joining us. We appreciate the response we've had, and we welcome you to this meeting this afternoon. We have three panelists, which we will be engaging with a little bit later. I'll give you a little bit of an introduction and overview first, but just to also thank our three panelists, Michael Lawrence, Simon Eppel, and Marti Rafael. Okay, so today we want to talk about the unrest in South Africa, understanding the impacts to the CTFL value chain, and how we can accelerate the recovery. I'm sure everyone has heard about the last week in KZN and Gauteng. I mean, I think we can also add to that people who are sitting in Cape Town right now probably dealing with disruptions of their own due to transport issues for getting employees to work. And it kind of all wraps up into this topic of unrest in South Africa. To start off, I want to acknowledge the funders for the two clusters who are hosting today's session, KZN CTC and the CCTC. These clusters are public-private partnerships between industry and public entities and the support of the eThekwini municipality, the Department of Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs of the province of KZN, the DTIC, IDC, and the City of Cape Town is duly acknowledged, and we thank them. Also, a bit of housekeeping, just in line with competition law, we present the following statement. And simply by joining today's session, you acknowledge that we won't be engaging in any behavior which could be construed as anti-competitive behavior. One more thing I want to raise in the introduction here. We have been, the Office of the Presidency has engaged with us, seeking information which they would like to use in order to direct, or at least gather information for directing their support and relief efforts. We've circulated links for a 5-minute survey. My colleague Tamlin will be posting the link into the chat as well, which you should be able to see right now. I see it's in. If you haven't already completed this and you'd like to have your say, please do so today. We need to submit those results by 5 p.m. this afternoon. Okay, now just a quick overview of what we're trying to do today. The session brings together the CTFL sector. We've opened it up to stakeholders outside of the two clusters, the CCTC and the KZN CTC, to the wider industry. We have attendees from some of the manufacturing associations and some different levels of government and a whole bunch of non-members. So we'd like to welcome all of our members, all of our other stakeholders, all of our public sector stakeholders, and all of our non-member firms operating in the CTFL industry as well. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you'll find the session valuable. So we want to recognize the operations and supply chain challenges that are facing the sector, highlight ways that we can collectively accelerate the recovery. There are a few polls and an online survey as well. And these things we hopefully will use to inform a sector situation report and feedback to crisis response teams. I want to start by recognizing that the events of last week were probably traumatic to quite a few. It's difficult for me sitting here in Cape Town to kind of comprehend the depth of what a lot of people went through. I know that a lot of you probably had some sleepless nights, either defending your house, your community, your business. So I just want to recognize that fact and say that we need to find ways of working together to recover. First, we'll process, I guess, what's happened, and then we need to find ways to recover and move forward collectively as effectively as possible. So what I've got on the screen now is this infographic that many of you will probably have already seen, has been widely circulated through the media, comes from the South African Property Owners Association, just to give the kind of scale of what's happened over the last week. Extensive damage to hundreds of malls, thousands of stores, uh, several warehouses and factories, and thousands of retail outlets. You'll see a whole bunch of different estimates of the impacts, either financial or in terms of numbers of employment, in the media and in a bunch of different places. Um, we're not here to um, talk so much about those different numbers, but just to say that all of them are sizable and definitely constitute a serious impact, which we want to try to understand and then find ways of trying to mitigate. So what I'll start off here is with a quick poll, which again my colleague Tamlin is going to post. We have a couple of these polls throughout the session. We'll also kind of intersperse them between our speakers, and then we will have time at the end for a Q&A with the panel as well. The first poll is about operations. Please let us know if your factory is not currently fully operational. What are the reasons? You can choose several, but there's a list of reasons, from damage to your building, supply chain disruptions, absenteeism, fears of continued unrest, theft of stock, damage or theft of machinery, orders withdrawn, or the option to indicate that you are fully operational. I'll give you a few more seconds to put in some responses. I'll just double check the chat quickly. See, there might be some issues. I'll try to speak more clearly into my microphone. Hopefully the sound will come through for everyone. I see that comment from Fiona. Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds for this poll before we end the poll and show the results. So far, I'd say fairly promising and not terribly surprising, I think in a good way. I will publish those results now. So we can see that the majority, 60% of firms are fully operational, which is good to see. And in terms of disruptions, we've got 26% reporting supply chain disruptions, 11% reporting absenteeism disruptions, and then a few isolated responses further down the list. But the majority being fully operational, which is good to see. But also we recognize that there are some supply chain disruptions and absenteeism issues, which we would look to deal with moving forward. Okay. Next, I have another one, a supply chain poll. I think this is appropriate, given that this was the largest factor cited in the last poll. If you're experiencing supply chain disruption, what is the critical break? Logistics, unavailability of raw materials, damage to key supplier or customer, or just indicate if you have no supply chain disruptions at the moment. So again, I'll give you a few seconds to fill in some responses. And then we will actually skip into our first panelist after this. So there's still a few responses coming through. Give it a few more seconds. A little bit more of an even split. However, so far, logistics is the leading cause of disruption in terms of supply chain. I'll give you 5 more seconds. So here you can see those results, which should appear on the screen. We have logistics cited by 56%, and then a fairly even split between unavailability of raw materials, damage to key suppliers, or those reporting no supply chain disruptions. So a majority reporting some kind of supply chain disruption, with the leading cause being logistics issues. Okay, I just want to introduce the panel we have today. Our first speaker will be Michael Lawrence. Michael is the Executive Director of the National Clothing Retail Federation. The idea is that he'll provide his perspective or the perspective of retail through the current crisis. Then we will speak with Marti Rafael. She's the chairperson of the National Bargaining Council, and we've asked her to join us today to provide a view of the state of manufacturing, apparel manufacturing in KZN. And then finally, we'll speak with Simon Eppel. He is the SA Clothing and Textile Workers Union Research and Policy Head. He will be providing insight into wage relief and labor's perspective on the current crisis. So to all attendees, please do engage via comments. You can see there is a Q&A function where you can type in questions, and we will have some time towards the end of today's session to address those to the panel. Also, there is a chat function, which many of you have already found. And that is an area where you can basically post comments which aren't necessarily directed to the panel, but could be part of a conversation with some of the other attendees, or simply stating some views there. So first off, I'm going to hand it over to Michael to talk from the retailer perspective. The areas that I'd like to focus on: short, medium, long-term challenges facing retail. If there's any ideas of expected recovery timelines, impacts to the master plan, and then a focus on what recovery efforts and initiatives are already being undertaken, and then if there's any indication of how the stakeholders in the industry can align themselves and support those recovery initiatives and efforts. Thank you, Michael. Over to you.
Thanks, Wes, and hi to everyone. Interesting times, difficult times, cold times as well. And I think I just want to share your sentiment to those who were negatively impacted by the civil unrest, whether directly in terms of just feeling your safety and security disrupted, your businesses, your family members, your staff. It's not something to be taken for granted, not something to be taken lightly. We've had, as the infographic showed earlier on, we've had something in the region of about 1,000 clothing stores damaged, disrupted, looted, the vast majority of which, almost half of which, are from the Pepco group, and a large number of which are not recorded on the infographic are small mom and pop shops, boutique stores, some really nice little operations that had looked to get a bit of something going in the spirit of entrepreneurship, in the spirit of the confidence they had socially, economically. And I've had people in last week, 2 persons in tears with me in last week, because they do not have the kind of financial muscle that some of the big retailers have to be able to ride out and wait until the insurance relief kicks in. And there are all those concomitant uncertainties that go with all of those retailers, small, medium, and large, as we look at the challenges going forward. The single biggest challenge last week, as many of you probably know, was to worry about the distribution centers, some very large operations close to the port and in the vicinity of the port, because of the importance of the Durban port as a place of import, and huge concerns about disruptions that might result across Southern Africa. And that caused all kinds of immense challenges to to our logistics time frame, our logistic chains, and the kind of time frames that are necessary when you're dealing with a time-sensitive product such as clothing. In the short term, we've got a hang of a lot of evaluating to do before even as we're doing cleanup. It wouldn't surprise me that some stores are going to close. That comes with all kinds of peculiar challenges, whereas to the way in which shopping malls are going to look into the future. Somebody asked me the other day, it was Bruce Whitfield who said to me, surely that's may be to the advantage of the larger retailers if all of the small competitors have got to close down now. And it's not. It's the South African mall experience, the South African retail experience is about the variety of opportunities that normally exists in respect of malls. We have a peculiar mall culture in this country, and so just the opportunity to have that kind of diversity is we think actually going to be a significant blow to our operations. We are obviously looking at what the impact in reality is in manufacturing. Marty will speak more to that, but there's been huge disruption in terms of local manufacturing, and so our supply chain is deemed to be a challenge. And again, because our supply chain has very seasonal implications, there are some concerns. I certainly do have the concern that it might be a lot easier for some merchandise planners and buyers to just look at product available offshore. And when we consider that even yesterday there was still civil unrest activity in parts of KZN, there are many of us who just feel that we may be nowhere near the end of the problem. Our medium to long-term challenges are around consumer confidence. When I joined Proudly SA's board about 4 or 5 years ago, we undertook to make significant efforts to make the South African consumer have a belief in and a confidence in the quality of the South African clothing product, and to buy it not just because it was romantic and garden country and for a flag, but to believe in it because it was a product of quality, it was a product of eminent functionality. And we're now going to have two problems. One is there's not going to be very much pride left in South African products if, as a nation, we don't have enough pride in ourselves to protect ourselves and each other. And the other side of the problem is we are going to increasingly be faced with communities now where disposable income that can be spent on clothing, even for essential purposes, is the income streams are going to be a lot less. We're likely to see, and the estimates of 100 to 150,000 jobs being lost as a result of this, we think are going to play out quite negatively. And then you also have social, the issue of social confidence. People don't want to really spend money anyway, even if they do have it, and that in its medium to long term is an enormous challenge. We think the recovery is going to take anything from 3 to 6 months to simply get the shops up and running again. It could take something in the order of about 12 months to get anywhere near to something that looks like normality in terms of trading turnover, and anything between 12 to 24 months before we start seeing some elements of confidence re-emerging that allows us to do some constructive planning in respect of our processes. How will that impact the master plan? The master plan is time sensitive. The master plan is based on a collective of confidence, the confidence of the manufacturers, confidence of labor, confidence of retail, and especially confidence of the consumer. So we think it might have a time impact, but those of us involved in the master plan remain committed to the elements, the pillars of the master plan, to continue to see it continuing in some functional way. We have a number of recovery initiatives that range from providing food to looking at additional security services to trying to look at creative alternatives when it comes to manufacturing, to trying to make sure that we in fact do not by accident undermine the recovery of an area that's been disrupted because we've relocated all our orders somewhere else. So there's some important strategic conversations happening right now, some of which are incredibly basic and many of which are incredibly sophisticated. But we will recover because we are that kind of value chain. And I'll take questions afterwards on all of that. Thanks, Wes.
So just one thing, you say that, I think it's interesting, that's 3 to 6 months for stores, 6 to 12 months for turnover, and 12 to 24 months for confidence. Is there anything that stakeholders on the call here can do to shorten those timelines? Or what can the average South African do to shorten those timelines and accelerate that recovery?
So I think we need to find a way to develop a confidence narrative about our value chain. That's going to be quite important. There are a few initiatives that are being envisaged by various stakeholders and groups of value chain stakeholders at the moment. And my plea is that where we need to be robust with each other, we do it within the confines of others not watching us leave a little bit of blood on the floor. That's not a bad thing, but we need to be messaging. We need to be putting out a narrative of confidence that allows people to believe in us, believe in the product that we have, the product / service experience that we have to offer, and that will get South Africans back into the game of participating as being the kinds of consumers that we know are necessary for the value chain to have sustainable growth opportunities.
Thank you. And we'll circle back to you later, I'm sure. Now I'll hand it over to Marty to give us the manufacturing perspective as the chair of the Bargaining Council and CEO of PEP Clothing. I think probably has her finger to the pulse of manufacturing in a big way. So Marty, over to you.
Thank you, Wesley, and good afternoon to everybody attending the session. I think Michael has summarized the general state of affairs quite well. But if we look at manufacturing specifically in and around KwaZulu-Natal, and this excludes the Gauteng, we have a couple of companies affected in Gauteng, but the majority is definitely in KwaZulu-Natal. And we've got confirmed reports of 24 companies that were severely impacted. About half of them burned down, the rest were looted. And then we've got another unconfirmed report of 20 additional companies. And it might seem ludicrous that some of the reports are unconfirmed, but as Michael as well said, there are areas where it's still not safe and stable to go into. So it's a huge challenge to quantify and assess the damage in all the areas. So I think if we look at the immediate challenges, rightly so, food and basic needs in a lot of areas are the main concern. And then definitely to try and create stability in the areas to make sure that our people are safe. And not, when I say our people, it's the entire supply chain, and everybody's people need to be safe. And the stability will also enable us to assess, because after we've assessed, we can then engage with government and all the other stakeholders, like we have been doing for the past couple of days, to try and quantify what the damage is and what is needed to start rebuilding. So the short-term challenges is pretty much survival in high definition, and survival not in the sense that we've been talking about survival of the supply chain and survival of manufacturing. It's literally survival on the ground. And then in terms of medium term, the challenges would be, how do we apply the limited resources? And resources for manufacturers per se is very limited, in the sense that even though many of the companies do have insurance and SASRIA insurance as well, the smaller companies don't have that. And a lot of them are also underinsured. So from an insurance point of view, we cannot look to insurance companies to bail out our manufacturers in need. Then the next port of call would be the retailers, who are the customers of these manufacturers. But again, retailers were also heavily affected. So the retailers also have limited resources to assist manufacturers to get up and running again. And then the next port of call is looking at government. And we already know that government resources are very tight and limited. So again, it is, how do we take all the resources, limited as they may be, and channel them to firstly the much needed or most needed areas and activities, and then start rebuilding the industry. And I think the question also needs to be asked in terms of, what is it that we want to rebuild, and do we rebuild like for like, which in some cases where we had state-of-the-art facilities and world-class facilities, that might be like for like. But perhaps the way to look at this challenge is from an opportunistic point of view, to see how can we build something that is better, brighter, and more suitable for our entire supply chain, and placed in such a position that we can enable the master plan success. As I mentioned, and Michael also referred to it, a lot of the activities that has been taking place and the conversations that's been taking place for the past couple of days is channeled through the master plan, because the master plan has been set up to develop the industry, and perhaps the master plan focus is shifting slightly to firstly focus in the KwaZulu-Natal area. But because those structures are already in place in terms of infrastructure, task teams, government entities, training and development entities, they all exist. And the best way to cohesively channel the activities will be in the master plan. So the vehicle is there, but it's up to all of us to firstly assess the damage and then make tactical decisions. What do we rebuild? How do we rebuild that? And how do we shift short-term focus from one activity to another to enable us to stimulate the economy? Because absolutely, jobs have been lost. So it makes the challenge that much bigger to realize the master plan. But we are absolutely positive. I mean, the mere fact that we are here and working together, I think we all share the same sentiments that we're a nation that when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and we're pretty much all tough. So we've got the political will, the will in terms of survival, and the will in terms of building something new and better to make this succeed. Then just looking at the recovery efforts and initiatives, as I mentioned, there's a lot of conversations going on. The challenge is to channel them and to make sure that there's no duplication, so that we make sure that some entities that need assistance are not getting lost in the wash because they might not be high profile or on a specific list. So there's a couple of surveys that are going around, similar to the one that's in the chat, and that will enable government to populate a formal list of companies and assess the damage. And although it's a challenge to assess damage because it takes time, it's 5 minutes to complete the survey, but it's hours and hours of work to actually calculate and assess what the true extent of the damage is. But if we can ask and appeal to everyone to please complete the survey so that we can have a better understanding of exactly what the damage is, so that we can make sure that the limited resources that we have are channeled in the absolute best way possible. Then lastly, looking at the recovery time, I think it's extremely difficult to put a number to that. Physically, to set up a new factory can be very quick. If you've got enough money, within 6 months, you can build something fantastic. It takes between 3 and 6 months to train a huge amount of machinists, get them up and running. So I think timing will depend on what resources we have available in terms of finances, and also how soon we can get raw materials replaced. Because yes, like Michael said, demand will drop. The demand will be there, but it will be lower than before. But as stores rebuild, from a retail point of view, we as manufacturers would have to make sure that we are able to deliver what we have promised to deliver, or have open communication channels to our retail customers to make sure that they understand where they need to move, hopefully temporary move, source where we cannot supply locally. But this is the time to really make sure and try and deliver the best service as we possibly can, because what typically happens is when one supply is in danger, or one supply area is endangered or gets cut off, the retailers, they do need their stock. And unfortunately, that forces them to look at the next best supply. And we definitely don't want that to be China or offshore. So we need to put all efforts in to keep what was going to be manufactured local, still local. Because we all know once you've lost an order and once it's gone offshore, it's extremely difficult to bring those orders back onshore again, because the retailers have shareholders, they need to perform, and they need stock on their shelves. So I hope this is seen as a really great challenge, not an unsurmountable challenge, definitely one with all the resources we have, that we can really put heads and thoughts together. What do we rebuild and how do we rebuild that? Thank you.
Thanks. I just have one follow-up question. So if you are a manufacturer sitting on this call, um, and you maybe have suffered some damage at your factory, or maybe you haven't and you're very thankful for that, but you have logistics problems. So you've recommended making sure that their information or their status is captured in things like those surveys, making sure that they're pursuing excellence in the work that they do to maximize their chances of kind of securing business and continuing to secure business. And there's all these conversations that are happening at various levels on recovery plans. But how can those people who are sitting on this call become more active participants in the recovery process, instead of just doing their best and hoping to be a passenger on the recovery? How can they become drivers of the recovery?
I think the first step, like you said, is to complete the survey. That's the first thing. And then communication challenge specifically with the retail customers, because the decision has been made that the recovery plan will be channeled through the master plan. And the master plan, although there are different stakeholders in the master plan, of which manufacturing is one of the stakeholders, and labor is also a large stakeholder, at the moment, the retailers are driving the narrative. So it's very important to stay in tune with the retail customers to make sure that they understand what the extent of the damage is. And ultimately, it's the retailers that will drive what is being rebuilt and how it's being rebuilt. So I think it's imperative to keep the channels of conversation open with the retailers to make sure that those relationships are being kept healthy, and where there is still manufacturing capacity, even though a part of a business has been damaged, that the retailers understand what the current capacity is, what is remaining, and what the intention of the manufacturer is. Because I'm also aware that some companies just simply gave up and said they're actually not going to rebuild. So it's very important that we understand what the need and the want of a manufacturer is, and where it's either been burnt to the ground or there's extensive damage. If the will is there and there is capacity to revive, we have to know about them, and they have to get actively involved in the conversation through their retailers. That would definitely be my recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure the clusters will try to play their part in being conduits of that information as well, and the manufacturing associations and
Definitely.
various other levels. Great, thank you, Mikey. Next step, we have a couple of polls here in between speakers. So I'll ask my colleague Tam to post the next one, the recovery poll, which should come up on your screen any second. Okay. Is your business able to recover? Basically just, again, kind of quantifying the impact. This is part of the trying to ensure that there's a suitable flow of information between what's the situation on the ground and some of those decisions that are being made at various levels. So is your business able to recover? Has there been a minimal impact, medium impact and loss to employment, a major impact and downscaling? Perhaps, unfortunately, recovery is not possible and business may need to close, or simply just let us know that there hasn't been any major impact to your business. I see quite a few responses coming through. I'm just going to give a few more seconds for you to put your answer into the poll, and then we have one more poll, I think, before the next speaker. Give it 5 more seconds. Okay. So we can see the way that the results kind of, I guess this is encouraging from my perspective. Almost 60% reporting a minimal impact, 26% medium impact and loss to employment, definitely unfortunate. 8% major impact and downscaling, obviously not something we'd like to see. I am also encouraged, however, by the fact that no one has responded. Recovery not possible, business will close. So, I think that, again, the industry is demonstrating its resilience here. One more poll before our next speaker, market demand poll. How do you expect the unrest to impact your market demand? No change, a 1 to 10% decline, an 11 to 20% decline, a decline of more than 20%, or perhaps even an increase, depending on what your particular situation is. So do please let us know what the situation is for your business, how the unrest has impacted your market demand, and I'll allow you a minute or so just to put your responses in and send us those. So I'll give you 5 or 10 more seconds. So here we can see about 8%, no change. The majority here, 56%, seeing some kind of decline, but less than 10%. About a quarter reporting an 11 to 20% decline. Another 8% reporting or expecting rather a larger decline of over 20%, and a small number of respondents reporting an increase. So thank you for the input. Again, these all help us to understand the situation more and shape our responses more effectively. So at this point, I'll just hand over to Simon Eppel from the Clothing and Textile Workers Union to speak about the labor perspective for the last week or so.
Thanks, Wes, and good day to the colleagues, many whose names I recognize. Like Michael, I just wanted to offer Saktu's, I suppose part of it is condolences and other of it is solidarity with colleagues. Despite the fact that industrial relations may be characterized by, elements of oppositionality on the shop floor, I think we are all in this together, and our colleagues in who are the manufacturers and who've been so impacted, we understand the difficulty of the time, the trauma of what's happened, and the challenge to rebuild, and labor shares in the pains of it, because we're busy calculating the risk of employees, and I think we are already well into several thousand who look impacted. So colleagues, thanks for the opportunity to address you. Justin, let me just start with this. I saw a little comment coming up in the chat. Can one fake confidence? I mean, in a context like this, look, I think sometimes one can fake confidence. in a context like this, I don't know whether that's the key. I think the abiding lesson that I have as a social anthropologist from spending time in the working class movements is that the ability to survive adversity is based on the tool of mutual assistance. And that defines every smart strategy since people lived in caves or even beforehand. And it is the reason how people overcome immense hardship. And it's the reason why our communities who were under threat last week and our businesses that were under threat last week survived due to the fact of mutual assistance. So it seems to me that more than faking confidence, and Michael, I say that with huge love and respect, more than faking confidence, we need to maybe in the period ahead adopt the principles of mutual assistance and active citizenship. And that's embodied and embedded in the fact of being members of the cluster. That is exactly what you do. And so it sounds to me as though the clusters have a competitive first mover advantage over much of the industry by virtue of the fact that you understand some of those principles. But that sounds to me as though what we must do, and Marty and Michael both speak to it. The fact that we're talking about the master plan as a driver of recovery. We're talking about that because it is a space of mutual assistance, collaboration, engagement across party lines. There are several things which have got to happen. Firstly, the effect of last week is devastating. Economically, socially, politically, emotionally. Having said that, our task is to rebuild. And if that is it, then what is it that we should do? There are immediate steps to take. There are probably medium to long steps to take, medium to long-term steps to take. And then there's embedded and threaded through all of that the question of how to avoid something similar in future. And hopefully what has happened is a moment, a specific moment of an unfortunate confluence of many things, which is not going to be repeated. But to do our darndest to make sure it's not repeated. And that means weaving through our immediate responses and our medium to long-term responses, I think, ways that we mitigate at least one of the components of that problem that are in our control, and that's the creation of jobs and the building in of inclusivity into the economy that we all participate in. So, what that looks like, we can have that debate at another day, but the simple thing is, I suppose, the more people feel invested in the economy around them, the less likely they are to engage in or to feel as though they can participate in the kinds of actions we had last week, which is not to endorse anything, but it's as a mitigation strategy for future. And it may be very worthwhile to have a conversation at some stage. What does a more inclusive economy look like? I'm not saying socialism, rah-rah socialism, a Mandla socialism. I'm saying, there must be permutations on a scale that we could explore. In the immediate term, there are a couple of things that we've put on the table. We're engaging with our colleagues in retail, Michael and the national retailers. We're engaging with our colleagues in the manufacturing sector. And my understanding is it's not my place now to table all of that stuff. You want me to focus on something specific, but I'm just going to read off the checklist at the kind of, at the Usain Bolt version of it, which is, essentially a collaborative vehicle to deal with some of the disaster in the immediate term, dealing with some of, seeing what impact we can make on food security, dealing with the income vulnerability of workers, which I'll come to more largely in a moment, seeing whether it's possible through the CETAs, hopefully to squeeze them for some kind of training dispensation to mop up workers who are unemployed for a period of time, seeing whether or not there are distressed funds that can be developed and or tapped into, trying to see whether we can fast track the payment of insurance to companies and the top up of that insurance for companies who qualify, and where they don't qualify, trying to see whether or not we can get that back by National Treasury. That's something we're trying at the moment for COSATU to do. securing demand through the retailers to make sure that this disruption doesn't lead to the offshoring, but results in an opportunity to restock and rebuild, which is a conversation that we're pursuing. And then obviously thinking what we do beyond the industry and our the people in the industry, so we have a larger impact. Coming specifically to the question, or this wage question, look, what do you do in the event that you're a factory you're one of the 44 or so that Mark has referred to? You've been looted, you don't have your assets, you don't have machinery in the factory, or the factory has been burned. You know, in that case, in amongst all the other chaos that you've got to fix, you've got employees who, through no fault of their own, are sitting at home. And there are a couple of UIF schemes. The UIF is a swear word, I think, for most of the colleagues on this call. And I recognize that. And so I'm not a snake oil salesman telling you to, go and engage with your best friend that you hate. It's an open secret that they're a problematic organization. Nevertheless, there are at least 2, possibly 3 schemes that you should consider in the event that you're one of those companies whose operations at the moment has ceased. And you're in the process of rebuilding. The first one is a lesser known one that came into effect. It actually comes from changes to the law in 2016, but it was operationalized in the UI19 form only last year, I think. It's called the UIF Reduced Working Time Provision. It's termination code 17 on the UI19 form. And essentially what it allows you to do is the employee can claim UIF benefits even while they remain employed. So without terminating the contract, an employee can continue to claim UIF. And that allows workers essentially in a context like this to remain employed, be at home while the work is done to rebuild. The other tool, which many of the colleagues know, is the old CCMA. It's the CCMA TERS, which was previously the training layoff scheme. Some colleagues on the call may have tried it. It's got a very bad reputation. It moves very slowly. Nevertheless, what it does is for a 12-month period, pay 75% of the wages of employees, either while they're at home or even if they're in production. You can complement it with skills training. The wage subsidy is funded by the UIF. The skills training is funded by the CETAs. It moves incredibly slowly, and so we would be able to play a role to help companies apply for it if they wanted, and I would be able to deploy 2 union colleagues to act like watchdogs and bark at UIF officials to try to get it through. So that's something we could do, as well as link colleagues who are interested to the first tool. The third one, whereas just before I finish, is even more of a swear word, which is why I've left it to the end, which is the COVID TERS. Now that's the one where, we've all patently watched the unbelievable challenges in the UIF last year through payment of the COVID TERS. We are at this point trying to have conversations at a national level to see, can we get the COVID TERS rules amended so that companies in KZN and Gauteng who've been impacted can be included as workers who can get cover through it. And so much like the way we've just extended that TERS to cover hospitality workers, restaurant workers, workers in the alcohol value chain, we are trying to also get it extended at this point to workers in KZN and Gauteng who've been impacted. That's not yet covered. Hopefully we're going to have an announcement about it in the next couple of days, but I hope that gives some clarity to colleagues who may be looking for some rebuilding tools. Thanks, Wes. I've gone beyond my time.
Thank you, Simon. I appreciate your input, and we'll circle back to you in the Q&A. We have 2 short polls, and then we'll have the open Q&A. There's already a couple of questions in the Q&A, but if you have anything to add, please do feel free to type in your question there. The first poll relating to people, how are your employees affected by the unrest? Did they suffer direct physical harm? Were they unharmed but unable to travel to work? Were they unharmed but not willing to travel to work? Have they experienced psychological trauma, or were they largely not affected? So I see quite a few responses coming in quickly. So I'll give a few more seconds. Okay, so we can see about 10% did suffer some direct physical harm, which is very unfortunate. The majority unharmed but unable to travel to work. A lot of disruptions with travel arrangements. And then quite a few, 45% reporting psychological trauma. I think that's one of the more insidious results that definitely needs to have, you need to keep an eye on that as your workforces do return to the factory. Okay, and then the last one relating to investment confidence. This is a two-parter, one part on South Africa, one part specifically KZN. And again, we're just trying to get a sense for, maybe this speaks to Justin's comment in the chat and Simon's comments as a response to that on confidence, whether it is real or faked, or where does that confidence come from? So we do have the poll up, basically the same responses in two questions, first for KZN and then second for South Africa. So please do take a second to put some responses in there so that we get a better idea of where people are at. So again, I'll give you probably another 20 seconds and then we'll move ahead into our open Q&A and start tackling a couple of the questions from our Q&A chat. So with your answers coming through, I'm going to give you, you know what, actually, I'm just going to leave that poll up. And you can keep putting in your answers for another 30 seconds or so while we move on to the Q&A portion. So there's only two questions in the Q&A so far. I encourage anyone who's on the call to put a question in there. The first one directed at Michael. And the question is, what policy mechanisms could support CTFL recovery? Examples could be fabric rebate mechanism, phase 2 and 3 being sped up, etc. So, Michael, do you have comments on that?
So, yeah, Courtney, the short answer obviously is this, the quicker we can get the fabric rebate mechanisms in place, the better. There's a lot of standing on ceremony and institutional protection of whether it's from ITAC or SARS or even some of us who are participants in constructing the way these interventions should be looking. We spend a little more time focusing on looking after ourselves and our institutional kind of operations rather than recognizing we can just unlock and let things go. And maybe it's just time now. We've had enough bad news and problematic issues. And it's not just the fabric rebate mechanism. There are a couple of other things where certainly we've been stirring the pot with each other for a little while now, and it's time we just let rip with some of the initiatives that maybe feel a bit scary, but should be followed on quickly. I want to just speak to the confidence issue quickly. Mark Twain said, "A lie can travel around the world and back again, while the truth is lacing up its boots." And that's the nature of bad news. Bad news is very good at getting out quickly, and there are times when we just feel bad. And I mean, my typical example, I mean, the day I descended from Kilimanjaro, I mean, I was dead tired, dead beat. I'd had a friend of mine die on the mountain, and I said, I'm never going to walk on a mountain again. That's the bad news point. The reality is there's a good news element in it always. And the question is, what is the narrative? And sometimes we just need to be a little slower with the bad news we have to put out there and the lack of confidence. And yes, there are going to be those moments for all of us. I had some incredibly depressing thoughts in the course of the last 2 weeks. But it's important that we focus on our confidence and we allow other people, especially in this era of social media, rapid social media messaging, we allow other people to build on thoughts of confidence, because otherwise the lie will just keep spinning around the world and the negative will spin a lot faster than we can reach. I don't ask us to be difficult. Yeah. Oh, Justin, I'd love to answer that, but let other people talk.
So yeah, I mean, there's a few more questions that have come through now. A couple relating to the master plan. I think it's a concern that's come up a few times over the last whatever it is, almost 2 years, I suppose, since it was launched. The difference between a 10-year goal and whether there or not there are annual milestones. I'm not sure if you guys can speak to that or not. But there's also so there's that, and also the question I think it's worth discussing for the last 5 minutes or so is this issue of confidence. So I'll leave those two things out there, and I'll also at the same time share the results to this poll, where you can see slightly in the lead, continue to cautiously invest in KZN. If we look at the national picture, there's a clear preference for only considering investment in South Africa in the case of fundamental changes to the business environment. So definitely something to consider when thinking of investment confidence moving forward. So I'll leave it to you guys. Those two questions: master plan targets to 2030 versus annual interim targets, and also that issue of confidence in investment, and how do we build that back?
Let me jump in before Michael steals the thunder on targets, but I'll leave him with the targets. Michael, if you want to actually speak to the targets for your members, because we must all put a lot of pressure on Michael and his colleagues to make their targets. Let me say this first. We want the master plan to deliver jobs, and we want it to deliver localization in the form of rands spent, in the form of units manufactured locally, in the form of bodies behind machines, in the form of new factories. That's an absolute priority for us, and we are consistently engaging with our colleagues in retail about it, sometimes politely, sometimes much less so. One of the big takeaways, I think, for me personally, and I speak in my personal capacity here, is that the task of social or broad industrial engineering, I don't mean factory-based or workplace-based industrial engineering, I mean broad engineering of a space, is a difficult one and a challenging one, and it involves moving many pieces. Part of those are relational, the relationships between people, the building of trust to make sacrifices, and part of that is actually operationalizing parts of the plans. And that is taking a lot more time than the actual document plan would have suggested. But I believe that those tasks are fundamental, that you can't deliver on the plan without delivering on the other parts of it, such as trying to understand the nature of problems, trying to institute something, it fails, you try something else, it's not working quite as well. So there's a lot of attempts. Take for example, the rebate mechanism in woven fabrics, an unbelievable milestone to get there, an unbelievable schlep for those of you who know Yiddish, an unbelievable schlep to get this thing to work, because we are corralling SARS people, these people, those people, the next people, and it's hard. I've got absolute confidence we're going to get there in the end, but to move the pieces of this chessboard, it appears to be much harder than a document outlines. Having said that, the task of all of us is to reach those outcomes. The task of all of us is to put pressure on each other to reach those outcomes, and not to find complacency in the fact of difficulty. It is difficult, it is challenging, but we must, and we are mandated to deliver. I get a tongue lashing from union members and union executives at some of the pace. Michael gets a tongue lashing from us. Marty gets a tongue lashing from Michael. We're going to have to do this through working together. It's the smartest way. Hopefully, as we deal with it more and more, we iron out the bumps and we have an exponential speed that develops. But that's how I would caveat the question about milestones. But I encourage all of the colleagues on this call to put maximum pressure on Michael in the next part of the questions.
And thank you very much. Wes, let me just say this. We have a problem that has systemically become messy for, it took us something in the order of about 60 years to turn this into an entire mess, collectively, all of us, all of the players, all of the participants. We all actively participated in weaving together a mess. Okay, so that's cool. I like the fact that we have finally gotten around to having some very ambitious objectives as part of the master plan. And quite frankly, I like the fact that we do have talk shops, because if we weren't talking to each other, we'd actually just be creating more of a mess. We have seen out of these so-called talk shops, we must be talking to each other. For goodness sakes, there's no other way of doing it other than by speaking to each other and identifying pathways to unraveling the mess that we've all contributed to creating in the first place. What's the really great part of it? Retail still has tens of billions of rands to spend. What's the really great part of it? There's a hell of a lot of manufacturing capacity and competence and expertise on the ground. And there's a hell of a lot of expertise in terms of the human spirit and the human skill set that many of which belongs to SACTU at the moment and still can be leveraged. We have a huge amount of opportunities, and our job is to keep talking to each other as we continue to make it work better and better. It does require conversations, because it's not going to happen if we all stand watching each other and if we all don't have a collective plan to work towards with each other. So, and yeah, put pressure on me, because I am unashamedly going to put pressure on everyone else in the stakeholder group. We were encouraged in the master plan to achieve vertical integration. I saw that comment come up somewhere in either a question or comment. And in part, vertical integration, if it's not institutionalized in terms of a company, it is institutionalized in terms of human engagement, person to person. And so we need to be talking to each other. These kinds of events are important, as are others, as are one-on-one events. We must be talking, for goodness sakes.
Thanks, Michael. We're 2 minutes over. Marty, 30 seconds, closing comments.
I think if I can just add to the comment of whether the master plan is working or just a talk shop, I want to challenge everybody to actually start participating through the different structures, because there's not a single manufacturer that I'm aware of that has not got some voice towards the master plan and putting pressure on deliverance through the structures in terms of employer organizations, the bargaining council, trade union, or your retail customers. So for anyone who feels that they either don't know what's happening or they have no leverage to put pressure on deliverance and milestones, get involved, because your structures are all represented there. So yeah, nice invitation. Thanks.
Thank you. So there's a consistent messaging here is keep demanding more from those who are supposed to be providing to you. Excellent. Thanks, everyone. We haven't quite got to all of the questions. I see there's more and more coming through now, but we're already 3 minutes past time, and I don't want to eat into any more of everyone's afternoons, as I'm sure you have a lot of work that's waiting for you. We have a short feedback poll, which is just the usual. Just let us know whether the session today was valuable and how well facilitated it was. We definitely appreciate this feedback so that we constantly strive to make these sessions better and more engaging. I'd like to thank each of our panelists today, Michael and Simon and Marty, for giving us their time and sharing their insights with us. We really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank all of the stakeholders who joined us on the call today, whether funders, industry stakeholders, members of one of the clusters, or non-members. We appreciate you taking your time to join us today. We appreciate your input, and we would like to hear from you again. So with that out of the way, just thanks everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful remainder of your day. and we will speak to you again soon.